Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. If there was one thing Tuppence Beresford could never abide, it was a drawer that pretended to be organised while secretly harbouring chaos. On that particular mid-morning, she was elbow-deep in the worst offender, the agency's miscellaneous drawer, which had evolved over time into a sanctuary for every stray document, snapped pencil, expired train timetable, and mysterious key that neither she nor Tommy could remember acquiring. Genteel widow, fond of pianos and parakeets, seeks a gentleman of worldly mind for correspondence only. Tommy read aloud from the newspaper, legs crossed and slippers abandoned under the tea table. I say, Tuppence, we ought to recommend her to Albert. He's always wanted a parakeet. Tuppence shot him a dark look over her shoulder. Albert is 26, and the only bird he's fond of is roast chicken. Tommy folded the paper with a satisfied rustle. Well, at least the matrimonial column continues to offer hope to the lovelorn. What I would like, she muttered, is hope for this drawer. I'm convinced it's breeding paperclips. She extracted a wad of folded case notes, several rubber bands that snapped accusingly, and a fountain pen long past its prime. With a sigh, she pushed the drawer shut with her foot. A soft knock sounded at the front door. Tuppence froze. It was not the brisk rap of the postman, or the cheerful tapping of Mrs. Sprott from upstairs. This knock was hesitant, almost apologetic, as though the knocker were unsure whether they had come to the right place at all. Tommy rose. If it's another salesman with a miracle mop, I'm feigning deafness. But when he opened the door, neither mop nor salesman awaited them. A small boy stood on the doormat, perhaps 7 years old, perhaps younger, wearing a blue cap several sizes too large and gripping a dented tin lunchbox with both hands. His shoes were scuffed, his cheeks pink from exertion, and his eyes, large, brown, frightened, flicked past Tommy and fixed directly on Tuppence. "Are you the lady called Tuppence?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I was told to find you." The room seemed to still. Tommy, usually the first to leap to humour, stayed silent. Tuppence approached slowly, her movements gentle as though afraid the child might bolt. "I am indeed Tuppence," she said, kneeling so they were eye level. "And who might you be, darling?" He swallowed. "Stephen." "No surname?" He tightened his grip on the lunchbox. "Just Stephen." Tuppence exchanged a brief glance with Tommy, a glance that spoke of odd cases past, secrets trusted to them in stranger ways, and a sudden shift in the comfortable air of the morning. "Come in," she said softly. Stephen stepped inside with the caution of a stray cat. His gaze darted everywhere, the framed watercolour above the fireplace, the coat stand, the tray of half-finished toast, as though mapping each object, measuring whether it signalled danger. Tommy closed the door behind him. "Have you lost your parents, Stephen?" The boy shook his head. "Are they waiting somewhere?" Another shake. "Were you sent here by someone?" Tuppence asked. A nod. "A lady." "Do you know her name?" "No." He hesitated, then added, "She said danger is chasing her shadow." Tuppence sat back slightly. It was an unusual turn of phrase, and too poetic for a child to invent, too vague to interpret easily. Yet Stephen uttered it with utter conviction. "What else did she say?" Tuppence prompted. "That you'd help, and that you'd know about the chair with the broken leg." Tuppence went utterly still. Tommy noticed at once. "Well, that's a peculiar thing to say," he remarked lightly, attempting to keep the tension from his voice. "Did she explain what she meant?" "Just that." Stephen hugged the lunchbox tighter. She was scared. Tuppence drew a steadying breath. The phrase, the specific phrase, tugged sharply at a long-locked-away memory. An old wartime assignment, a safe house disguised as an antiques shop, a rocking chair with a hollow leg used to smuggle code fragments. She had not heard reference to it in years. "Tommy," she said quietly, "would you ring Albert? Ask him to check for reports of missing children." Tommy nodded, sensing the gravity beneath her calm. He moved to the telephone, dialing swiftly. Tuppence guided Stephen to the sofa. "Were you hurt? Have you eaten? Would you like tea?" The boy's small voice trembled. "She told me not to stop. She said if I stopped, they'd find me first. Who are they, Stephen? He shrank back. I can't tell. Tommy returned. Albert says no reports. No one looking for a boy your age, nothing in the last 3 days. The child's fear sharpened. He looked as though he expected the walls to shift, the ceiling to cave in, or hands to come grabbing through the curtains. Stephen, Tuppence said, leaning closer, you came here because you believe this lady. You trusted her, and she asked you to trust me too. I promise you're safe with us. He stared at her for a long moment, as though weighing the value of safety itself, and finally whispered, She said they want something she had, something she hid, something about paper and names. Tuppence didn't blink. Did she give it to you? No, she said I must find you first. Tommy crouched beside them. Stephen, do you know where she is now? A shake of the head. Do you know how you came here? Did someone bring you? I walked, he said. She told me to go to the 2 red doors. Yours is red. But there are many red doors in London, Tommy said gently. She told me this one was near a corner shop with a wooden dog in the window. Stephen pointed. I saw it. Tuppence's mind was already racing. The wooden dog belonged to Mr. Holling's tobacconist around the corner, hardly an inscrutable landmark. But the specificity suggested the woman who guided Stephen knew exactly where to send him. How did you meet her? She asked. Stephen's eyes clouded. I can't say. She said not to. Tuppence didn't push. She could sense a deeper terror lurking, the fear of betraying someone who had protected him. She shifted tact. May I see what's in your lunchbox? He clutched it instinctively, but allowed her to open it. Inside lay a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a folded paper napkin, and a small knitted glove, clearly handmade. Nothing else. No documents, no notes, no clue why this child had been thrust upon them. Tommy straightened. Well, whatever this is, it's no domestic mix-up. Someone wanted him to reach you specifically. Which means someone else very much did not, Tuppence murmured. Stephen looked between them nervously. Are you angry? Tuppence's expression softened instantly. Not at all, sweetheart. Only determined. A hesitation passed through the boy. Then slowly, with the care of a child revealing the secret he feared most, he said, She told me they'd follow my shadow too, but she said you were brave. Tommy and Tuppence shared a look, one formed through years of partnership, marriage, mystery and danger alike. A look that said the morning's peaceful draw sorting was over, and the game, whatever it was, had begun. The spoon clattered against the saucer before Stephen even realized he'd dropped it. Tuppence caught it mid-bounce with the reflexes of a woman long accustomed to unexpected incidents and placed it neatly beside his untouched cup. The cafe on the edge of Shepherd Market was modest, friendly, bustling with late-morning chatter and the clink of cutlery, but Stephen sat hunched over his tea as if the room were full of shadows only he could see. Would you like another biscuit? Tommy asked gently. The boy's fingers tightened around the plate. She said not to accept food from strangers. Ah, Tommy said, lips quirking. But you've met us now. We're practically family by biscuit law. Stephen blinked, uncertain whether this was a jest or a rule he'd never heard of. Tuppence leaned closer, adding quietly, I promise we'd never give you anything that wasn't safe. With the smallest nod, Stephen accepted the half-biscuit Tommy nudged toward him. The child was still wary, still wound tightly as piano wire, but the warmth of the cafe seemed to soften the edges of his fear. Outside the window, shoppers moved between the flower stall and the greengrocer, while a busker attempted a hesitant melody on a violin. Ordinary life in every direction, and yet Tuppence felt no ease. You said the lady who helped you had a scratch on her cheek, Tuppence prompted. Do you remember anything else? Stephen didn't look up. Her voice was soft. She walked slow, like her ribs hurt. A pause. She kept checking behind her. Did she ever say why she was afraid? Stephen shook his head. Just that danger was chasing her shadow. That phrase again. Tuppence felt it prick the back of her mind, a whisper of something once known but buried beneath time. Tommy, meanwhile, watched Stephen's gaze, flicking from face to door to street and back again, and sensed the restless alertness of a child trained by fear, not mischief. Stephen, Tommy said, lifting his teacup, You've been very brave. We only want to understand so we can help the lady you're worried about. And you." Stephen opened his mouth, perhaps to try again, perhaps to refuse, but then Tuppence saw his small body go suddenly rigid. His eyes widened, his breath caught. He stared past her, toward the cafe window. Tuppence didn't turn at once. Instead, she leaned as though adjusting her napkin and flicked her gaze sideways. A man stood at the newsstand across the square. He held a newspaper open, but his eyes were not on the print. They were on Stephen. Dark hat, dark coat, posture too relaxed to be natural. Before Tuppence could speak, Stephen whispered, "He's one of them." The words slid out like a shiver. Tommy straightened sharply. By the time he rose to look, the man at the newsstand had already folded the paper and was walking briskly toward the narrow passageway between two buildings. "Stay with him," Tommy said under his breath. But Stephen grabbed Tuppence's sleeve. "No, don't let him follow us, please." "It's all right," she murmured. "We won't let anything happen to you." Tommy was already out the cafe door, crossing the pavement with long strides. Tuppence turned back to Stephen, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, tell me what you mean by one of them. What did the lady warn you about? Who are these men?" Stephen's voice cracked. "I can't. Stephen?" But he was no longer looking at her. His gaze had swung to the cafe entrance, where Tommy's retreating figure was disappearing around the corner. Something in that moment, fear, instinct, or a command drilled into him, made the child snatch up his lunchbox. "Tuppence, we have to go," he whispered. "We will—" "No now." She stood, ready to usher him out the door, but the boy stepped backward instead. Not toward her, away. His small shoes scuffed against the floor. His eyes darted to the rear of the shop. "Stephen, darling." But he turned and bolted. "Stephen!" Tuppence lunged, but a passing waiter blocked her path for half a half second too long. By the time she reached the cafe door and burst into the street, the pavement was full of late shoppers and bleating lorries. Stephen was gone. Just gone. His blue cap lay abandoned near the cafe threshold like an accusation. Tuppence snatched it up, her heart galloping. "Stephen!" she called, voice slicing through the noise. "Stephen!" No answer. No trace of a fleeing child. No scream. No direction. For a terrifying second she was paralyzed. Then training, intuition, the sharp reflexes of her old intelligence work surged to the foreground. She pressed a hand to her chest, forced herself into calm and scanned the surroundings. No running child, no struggling figure, no stranger carrying anything that could conceal a boy. Had he slipped away on purpose, been pulled into a side street, or... Tommy appeared at the corner, breathless. "He doubled back?" Tommy asked, reading her expression instantly. "I don't know. He was here, and then he wasn't." Tommy's frustration flashed, but he kept his voice low. The man from the newsstand vanished into the alley. Muddy footprints everywhere, and I couldn't get a clear trail, but he held up a small object. This was on the ground. A bus ticket stub. No, 22 route. "He dropped it," Tommy said. "Either accidentally or as a deliberate clue. Hard to say." Tuppence stared at the ticket, then down at the little blue cap clenched in her hand. "We need to assume the worst, that someone took him. Or that the boy ran because he saw something we didn't," Tommy added, "which may be the same thing." A moment of silence passed, the kind where urgency throbbed beneath every breath. Then Tuppence squared her shoulders. "Search the cafe. Ask the staff if they saw anything. I'll check around the corner." They moved swiftly. The cafe staff were apologetic but unhelpful. One waitress thought she'd glimpsed a child near the back corridor. Another remembered a man leaving in a hurry, but couldn't describe his face. A third insisted no child had gone out the rear door at all. Contradictions. Always the most maddening of clues. Tommy rejoined Tuppence outside. "No luck?" "None. But look." She opened the lunchbox, and there, tucked beneath the wax paper-wrapped sandwich, was something previously unnoticed. A tiny, folded scrap of paper. She unfolded it carefully. It was a miniature map, barely larger than her palm, showing the Chelsea riverfront. One spot near Cheney Walk was marked with a single red dot. "Well," Tommy breathed, "that's rather specific." "That woman wanted him to reach us," Tuppence said, "which means she prepared him, hid this for him to find later, or for us to find." She must have known she didn't have much time. Tuppence folded the map, slipping it into her coat pocket. This location, it could be where she lived, or where she was hiding, or where they found her. And the boy may have been returned to that area, Tommy said grimly. Tuppence looked again at the blue cap in her hand, then back at the bustling, indifferent square. Whether he ran or was taken, she said softly, that child is in danger, and someone clearly didn't want him speaking another word to us. Tommy nodded. Then we don't waste time. No, Tuppence said. We start at Cheney Walk. And the man from the newsstand? We'll find him too. Tommy offered his arm. Shall we? Tuppence took it. Yes, the sooner the better. The square buzzed around them, ordinary life continuing without pause, but the Beresfords stepped into motion with renewed purpose. Stephen had come to them for help, and now he was gone, but neither of them had the slightest intention of letting the case go cold, not when a frightened boy had asked for Tuppence by name. The brass bell above the gate gave a tired little rattle when Tommy pushed it open. Cheney Walk lay stretched before them like a row of stately dowagers pretending not to gossip. Each townhouse stood tall and dignified, their brick facades polished by time, their windows reflecting the slow sweep of the Thames beyond. Artists had lived here once, so had sailors, so had a marquis or two. The street possessed the sort of quiet that invited secrets to settle between the cobblestones. Tuppence unfolded the tiny map Stephen's lunchbox had sheltered. The red mark hovered over a particular portion of the street, so she scanned the facades until she spotted the cracked iron railing described in the margin, a narrow townhouse of dark brick, with ivy clinging stubbornly to the upper windows. This is the place, she murmured. Tommy gave the railing a nudge. It wobbled, protesting. Very respectable air of neglect, encouraging in a sinister sort of way. Tuppence mounted the stone steps and knocked. The brass knocker echoed once, twice. No footsteps approached, no latch shifted. Again, Tommy suggested, but before she could lift the knocker a second time, a window 2 floors above the cement scraped open, releasing a small puff of dust. A woman's head, grey hair in tight curls, popped out. If you're selling encyclopedias, we've all we need. Tuppence shaded her eyes. Not encyclopedias. We're looking for Miss Felicity Grey. The woman pursed her lips. Rarely home, that one. Odd hours. Never brings guests. Has she been home recently? Tommy asked. At peculiar moments, the woman said cryptically. Why? We have reason to believe she may be in trouble. The woman's expression softened. Well then, you'd better look in. The doors never latch properly. Hasn't been since the spring storms. The window shut with a decisive clack. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Hospitable neighbourhood. Resourceful at least, Tuppence replied, pushing the door gently. It swung inward without resistance. They stepped into a narrow hallway lined with faded wallpaper. A faint smell of lavender drifted from deeper within, comforting at first, but mingled with something sharper. Antiseptic? Spirits? The air held the undisturbed stillness of a room paused in mid-breath. Hello? Tommy called softly. No reply. They moved toward the sitting room. Dust motes floated in a slanted beam of light. A teacup lay overturned on a side table, a dark stain marking its fall. A scarf trailed off the arm of a chair like a limp flag. A half-packed suitcase sat gaping on the floor, garments spilling out with the helplessness of interrupted plans. Tuppence knelt beside it. Someone left in a hurry, or tried to. Tommy moved the scarf aside. No sign of a struggle, more a sudden flight. Tuppence ran a finger along the nearest shelf. A thin grey film clung to her fingertip. But she didn't finish packing, or cleaning, or anything. Her voice dropped. Whatever frightened her, it came quickly. A floorboard creaked above them. Tommy straightened. Upstairs. They moved quietly, the old staircase groaning at their ascent. The lavender scent grew stronger, tinged with an unpleasant medicinal bite. At the landing the sound came again, softer, like fabric brushing wood. Tuppence reached the top first, and froze. A woman lay crumpled near the banister, mid-30s, dark hair tangled across her cheek, clothing rumpled, one shoe missing. Her breathing was shallow, her lips pale, and on her left cheek, a scratch, a single clean line of broken skin. Stephen had been right. "Tommy!" He was already beside her, checking her pulse. Alive but weak, possibly fainted or injured. Tuppence knelt, brushing hair from the woman's forehead. The woman stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering. When they parted, her gaze locked directly onto Tuppence's face, with the recognition of someone waking into a nightmare. You came," she whispered. "You know me?" Tuppence asked softly. The woman's lips trembled. He said you would. The boy. Stephen, did you send him?" The woman's hand twitched toward Tuppence's sleeve. "Don't trust," her voice cracked. "Don't trust the man with the silver case." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a sharp glance. "Who is he?" Tuppence pressed. "What does he want?" But the woman shook her head weakly. "The chair. Always the chair." Tuppence leaned closer. "Which chair?" But the woman's eyes fluttered shut again. "Tommy," Tuppence murmured, "we need a doctor, and we need to know who this Miss Grey actually is." "I'll fetch the doctor," Tommy said. "Canvass the street. Get a telephone." "Telephone? Why didn't we think—" Her words cut off as footsteps sounded downstairs. Tommy drew back slightly, poised for confrontation. But it was only the neighbour, the woman with the grey curls, carrying a boxy telephone set in both hands, as though afraid to drop it. "Thought you might need this," she said. "Miss Grey rang me 2 nights past. Asked me to bring her the phone. Sounded most peculiar, disoriented, like she'd forgotten her own rooms." "Did she say why?" Tuppence asked. The neighbour shook her head. "Just asked for a doctor, but then said not to come after all. I put the phone in the cupboard when she changed her mind." She set it on a table. "Figured you might require it now." Tommy dialed the nearest surgery. Tuppence studied the neighbour carefully. "Did she mention a boy, child, any visitors?" "No visitors," the woman said firmly. "Miss Grey isn't the hosting type, but—" She hesitated. "I did hear raised voices one evening. A man. Sharp tones. Couldn't make out the words." "When was this?" The neighbour frowned. 2 nights ago, or 3. She shifted her grip on the telephone. "No, I'm certain it was 3. Tommy hung up. "Doctor's on his way." The neighbour nodded. "Good. Poor creature looks half dead." She stooped, adjusted the woman's skirt with real tenderness. She never asked for help, but she should have. Tuppence watched her as she left. Tommy. Her story shifted. From 2 nights to 3, and she hesitated before she said it. "Exactly." Tuppence exhaled. "She knows more." "Should we press?" "Not yet. She's nervous, but she'll talk again." As they waited for the doctor, Tuppence explored the upstairs rooms. The bedroom was modest, iron-framed bed, faded carpet, a bureau with neatly folded clothes. Books lined a shelf, some old, some new. Dust lay upon everything uniformly, except one corner where a circular void showed something had recently rested on the floor. A gentle rocking motion caught Tuppence's eye. It was a wooden rocking chair, slightly crooked, one leg missing. Tuppence approached slowly, the air tightening around her. She knelt, running her fingers along the break. The break was precise, not splintered by accident, but cut, hollowed. The woman's warning whispered in her mind. The chair, always the chair. "Tuppence," Tommy called from the landing. "Tommy," she replied quietly. "Come look." He entered, gaze falling immediately on the chair. One leg missing, and cleanly so. "This wasn't household damage," Tuppence murmured. "This was deliberate, as if something was hidden inside." Tommy crouched, examining the underside. "A hollow joint. You're right." Tuppence stood, imagining Stephen's frightened eyes, the woman's scratch, the hurried departure. This chair was important to her, perhaps even to the woman who sent Stephen. Something was in that missing leg. "Documents?" Tommy suggested. "Messages? A code?" "Possibly." Tuppence's mind clicked rapidly. Whatever was hidden, someone else knew about it, and wanted it. Enough to frighten her, enough to chase her. Tommy straightened. And enough to abduct Stephen. Or enough to frighten him into hiding, Tuppence corrected. Either way, the connection is undeniable. Footsteps on the stairs signaled the doctor's arrival. The neighbour followed behind him anxiously. As the doctor tended to Miss Grey, Tommy and Tuppence withdrew into the hallway, allowing space. "We have fragments," Tommy said softly. "A frightened boy, a collapsed woman, a broken chair leg, a man with a silver case, and a map with a single mark. And one woman, Miss Felicity Grey, who clearly meant for Stephen to reach us. Tuppence looked back toward the bedroom, and now she's lying upstairs with the answers locked behind exhaustion and fear. Tommy exhaled. Where do we begin? With the chair, Tuppence said firmly, and the missing leg. And the man with the silver case. They exchanged a resolute look. Outside, the Thames drifted past indifferently. Inside, the mystery tightened its grip. The chair looked entirely ordinary at first glance, a humble wooden rocking chair with gently curved arms and a faded cushion, the sort of thing one might inherit from a quiet aunt who crocheted lace and read romances by lamplight. But Tuppence had learned long ago that innocent objects were the most dangerous. They lured one into complacency before revealing the secrets tucked inside their unassuming corners. Now she crouched beside the crooked rocking chair in Miss Felicity Grey's bedroom, fingertips grazing the precise, almost surgical break where one leg had once been attached. "Tommy," she murmured, "come look at this angle." It wasn't snapped, it was removed. Tommy leaned down, squinting at the wood grain. "That's no accidental fracture. Someone took a saw to it." "A careful one," Tuppence added. "A practiced hand. Someone who knew exactly where to cut." She turned the chair slightly. Dust clung to the underside except for a narrow, clean streak, a faint outline where something had been inserted and then removed. Her breath caught. It was hollow. Tommy's eyebrows lifted. Ah, a hiding place. Tuppence exhaled slowly. A message inside a chair leg. We've seen that trick before. Tommy nodded grimly. Not since the war. A soft groan drifted from the landing where the doctor tended to Miss Grey. The neighbour hovered nearby, wringing her hands, her anxious murmurs drifting up the stairs. But Tuppence kept her focus on the chair. The soldier inside her mind, the one she rarely allowed forward now that the world preferred peace, stirred with cold recognition. She pressed her fingers into the hollow cavity, feeling along the interior. Nothing. No scrap of paper. No token. No clue. But then her touch grazed something papery near the very top of the cavity. "Tommy, a moment." She pinched delicately, coaxing the object free. A tiny rolled parchment slid into her hand, yellowed and brittle with age, scarcely larger than her smallest finger. Tommy's eyes gleamed. Well, well, a message in the chair. Tuppence unrolled it with care. The faint ink symbols were cramped and sharp-edged, written in a private cipher she recognized instantly, because she had once written in it herself. "This," her voice dropped, "this is ours, the Fenton cipher." Tommy let out a low whistle. Good Lord, haven't seen that blasted code since 1944. Tuppence stared at the lines of tiny symbols, her thoughts racing back 2 decades to a mission involving forged identity papers and a series of safe houses in rural France. It had ended badly, abruptly, when a child courier vanished with half the documents. "Tuppence?" Tommy asked softly. She shook herself from the memory. This cipher was used only once during that mission near Rouen, the one with the lost courier, the one we never solved. "And now it resurfaces in a chair owned by Miss Felicity Grey," Tommy said. "Curious doesn't even begin to cover it." "More than curious," Tuppence whispered. "It's impossible, unless—" Her eyes widened. "Unless the splinter cell from that mission never dissolved." Tommy exhaled sharply. "After 20 years, still active?" "Some operations never truly die," she said. "Not when there were missing pieces, not when a child disappeared." "And now another child appears," Tommy said quietly, "asking for you by name." They both turned as footsteps approached. The neighbour, Mrs. Cresswell, appeared in the doorway, twisting a handkerchief. "Is everything all right? I heard something drop." "Just the chair," Tuppence said with a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Cresswell, may we speak with you again?" The woman hesitated. Her eyes darted down the hall, then toward the staircase, as though unsure whether she wanted to remain in the conversation or flee from it. Tuppence approached kindly. "You mentioned raised voices the other night." Mrs. Cresswell swallowed. "I shouldn't gossip, but Miss Grey, she wasn't alone. I heard a man. Late. Very late." "What sort of man?" Tommy asked. "Deep voice. Rough. Not from around here. I didn't catch much, but they argued about papers." She wrung the handkerchief harder. "Important ones. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance. "And did you recognise him?" Tuppence pressed. Mrs. Cresswell shook her head. "No, but I saw someone else, perhaps, coming one evening. A tall man with a polished manner. He carried a silver cigarette case, kept tapping it like a nervous habit." Tommy shifted subtly. "Silver case?" "Yes," Mrs. Cresswell said quickly. "He never stayed long, and Miss Grey always seemed unsettled afterwards." Tommy opened his mouth to ask more, but the doorbell rang sharply from downstairs. Mrs. Cresswell jumped as though struck. "Oh, more visitors. I'll see who it is." She scurried away before either of them could stop her. Tuppence frowned. "Her nerves are worsening." "Or her lies are," Tommy said. "She's hiding something." Tuppence nodded, but before she could elaborate, voices drifted up from the hall, steady, low, authoritative. They exchanged a look and descended the stairs. Two men stood in the foyer with Mrs. Cresswell fluttering beside them. Both wore plain suits and official-looking expressions. "Ah, you must be Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," the taller man said, lifting an identification badge. "Inspector Lane, Chelsea Division. This is Sergeant Wilkes." Tommy inspected the badges with a practiced eye. Genuine, not counterfeit. "We received a call about a woman in distress," Lane continued. "We'd like to take statements." "Of course," Tuppence said smoothly. "We found Miss Grey unconscious upstairs. The doctor is with her." "We'll speak to him shortly," Lane replied. Before they could direct him upstairs, Tuppence noticed Sergeant Wilkes flipping open a silver cigarette case and tapping it lightly with his thumb. Her gaze sharpened. There it was, the unmistakable glint, the unmistakable motion. The same detail Stephen's strange lady had warned. Don't trust the man with the silver case. Tommy noticed too. They exchanged a nearly imperceptible nod. "We'll begin with your account," Lane said. They relayed the events calmly, searching for Miss Grey, discovering her collapsed, contacting the doctor. Tuppence carefully omitted the cipher. Mentioning it now would be premature. "What do you believe caused her collapse?" Lane asked. "We were hoping you might tell us," Tommy said lightly. Wilkes flicked a glance at the stairs. "Did she say anything before losing consciousness?" "Only that she needed help," Tuppence said, "and that she'd been followed." Lane's expression didn't change. "Followed? By whom?" She didn't specify. When Lane went to speak with the doctor, Wilkes lingered behind. He wandered the sitting room, inspecting objects with an air of idle curiosity. But Tuppence tracked every movement, every tap of that silver case. Eventually the officers thanked them and departed, promising to return once Miss Grey was stable. When the door shut, Tommy exhaled. "Well, that was suspicious." "Very," Tuppence agreed. "Lane I trust. Wilkes I don't. The cigarette case confirms it." Could he be the man from Stephen's cafe sighting? Possibly, or simply part of the same group. Tuppence moved toward the stairs. "Let's see how Miss Grey fares." The doctor met them halfway. "She woke briefly," he said, mumbled something about a child, seemed terrified, but she's stabilizing now. "We need to ask her questions," Tuppence said. "In time," the doctor replied. "She must rest. Come back later this afternoon." They thanked him and stepped aside as he left. Silence settled, but it was an uneasy silence, one that hummed with unfinished thoughts. Tommy crossed his arms. "So we have a cipher hidden in a chair, a terrified woman, a missing child, a lying neighbour, and a policeman with a silver case. And," Tuppence added quietly, "we have our past resurfacing." Tommy softened. "That old mission still troubles you." "It ended with a child disappearing," she whispered, "and now another child appears. This cannot be coincidence." Tommy placed a steady hand on her arm. "Then we hunt the truth, as we always have." She looked back toward the broken chair. Its absence of one leg seemed almost symbolic. A structure weakened, a secret removed, the last balance lost. "Someone wanted whatever was hidden there," she said, "which means they have it now, or they're still searching. And if they think Stephen has the rest," Tommy's jaw tightened, "he may be more danger than we realized." Tuppence straightened. "We must find him, and we must find that missing chair leg." "And the man with the silver case?" "Yes," she said, "especially him." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Cresswell reappeared, twisting her handkerchief again. Is Miss Grey going to be all right?" "The doctor believes so," Tuppence replied. "Oh." Mrs. Cresswell's eyes darted once more toward the chair upstairs. She was such a quiet woman, always looked over her shoulder. I told her to be careful. What did she say when you warned her? Tuppence asked gently. Mrs. Cresswell hesitated. She said she'd already failed once, and she couldn't fail again. Tuppence felt a chill. Failed whom? Tommy asked. Mrs. Cresswell looked at them with tragic uncertainty. The child, she whispered. I think she meant the child. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a grim look. The past had returned, with teeth, and the danger was only beginning. The envelope lay on the floor like a small, silent threat. Tuppence noticed it the moment she and Tommy stepped into their South Audley Mansions flat that evening. They had barely set their coats down when Tommy's eye followed hers to the narrow, buff-coloured rectangle pushed just beneath the door. He bent, retrieved it, and held it in the light of the hall lamp. No stamp, he said quietly. Hand delivered. Tuppence took it from him, her fingers steady though her pulse was not. The envelope was unmarked except for a faint smudge on one corner, a fingerprint or the residue of hurried handling. She opened it with the soft rip of paper parting under tension. Inside was a photograph. Stephen, bound to a chair, rope looped around his thin wrists, his blue cap missing, his expression frightened but alive, his eyes wide as though aware the camera was a weapon. Tuppence inhaled sharply. There was also a single slip of paper with typed words, "Stay out of what does not concern you. The boy will be returned when the grey matter is resolved." Tommy read over her shoulder, "Grey matter, Miss Grey." "And someone wants us to think this is simple ransom," Tuppence murmured. "But people who send warnings this cleanly rarely seek money." She flipped the paper. The tone struck her with military exactness, precise spacing, no wasted phrasing, clipped vocabulary. It was the sort of message she had seen more than once during operations, commands disguised as instructions, threats disguised as resolutions. "We're dealing with someone who knows protocol," she said, "or at least knows how to imitate it." Tommy placed the photograph on the table. "He's scared, but unharmed. For now." A knock sounded sharply at the door. Both froze, reflexively, silently. Another knock. Tommy moved toward the door, but Tuppence held up a hand. "One moment." She stepped quietly to the window, glanced through the slight gap in the curtain. The landing light shone dimly on a familiar figure shifting from foot to foot. Tuppence exhaled. "It's Albert." Tommy opened the door. Albert Young, their loyal friend and former office boy, now a grown man with a detective's instincts and an eagerness that sometimes outran common sense, burst inside with a flurry of breath. "I came as quick as I could," he began, but stopped when he spotted the photograph on the table. His face tightened. "Blimey, that's him. That's the little chap." "Stephen," Tuppence said gently. Albert nodded. "I asked around like you said. I checked notices from every borough, missing children, runaway reports, even private inquiries. Nothing matches him. It's like he doesn't exist on paper at all." "Which means someone erased him," Tommy said, "or hid him long before we met him." Albert shifted nervously. "That's not all. When I left the underground, I spotted a man watching the building. Tall, hat low, long coat. And I'm not sure, but I think he had a briefcase." Tuppence's gaze sharpened. "Describe him." "Couldn't see his face, but he walked away when I came up the steps." Tommy asked, "Could it have been the same man from the cafe, the newsstand watcher?" Albert swallowed. "Possibly." Tuppence moved the photograph closer to the lamp. Stephen's frightened eyes seemed to plead for rescue. "We're running out of time," she said softly. On the table lay the cipher they had retrieved from the hollow leg of Miss Grey's chair, the parchment she'd carried from the bedroom like a relic. Now Tuppence placed it between them, smoothing it flat. "We decode this tonight," she said. "Whatever Miss Grey risked, whatever she hid, whatever she feared, it's all here." Tommy pulled a stack of blank paper toward them. "We'll need grids, pattern columns, and your old notebook." Albert looked between them. "Should I help?" "You should keep watch," Tommy said, "from the landing." "Right." Albert hurried to the door, squared his shoulders, and stationed himself like a sentry. Tuppence took a deep breath, then dipped her pen in ink and began. The cipher was familiar in form but complex in arrangement. Each symbol, each angled stroke, each inverted letter carried a layered meaning. The Fenton cipher relied on pattern disruption, false repetitions hiding true sequences, mirror symbols disguising breaks, and an embedded second alphabet meant to mislead all but those who had trained with the original team. Tommy leaned close. "Look here, the third cluster. That shape repeats every 12 symbols." "A decoy," Tuppence said. "It always was." They worked for nearly an hour, the flat lit only by the amber glow of table lamps and the occasional flicker of passing car headlights from the street below. The scratch of pens became the steady rhythm of thought. Tuppence found herself slipping back into the old mental posture, quick, sharp, analytical, the way a pianist slips back into an old concerto after years of silence. "Hold on," Tommy said suddenly. "This sequence, if we transpose it with the secondary key—" Tuppence leaned in. Yes, that aligns with the exit routes." "Which would mean the next line is," she finished it with him, voice barely above a whisper, "deliver child to CG on receipt of the second document. Trailed, danger escalating." The room stilled. "CG?" Tommy asked. "Initials?" "Or code," Tuppence said. "Or both." "Second document," he added. "Meaning what we found was only half the exchange?" Tuppence nodded. Miss Grey had the second part, and someone was after it. "And after Stephen," Tommy murmured. Albert poked his head back in. "Everything all right?" "No," Tuppence said simply, "but we're starting to see the edges." She lifted the parchment again, studying the strokes with renewed urgency. This wasn't smuggled for nothing. This was communication between operatives. And Stephen was the courier now. A sudden noise, sharp, metallic, jolted all three of them, a clink like metal tapping glass. "Window," Tommy said instantly. They moved as one. Tommy crossed the flat swiftly, threw back the curtains, and saw nothing but the retreating shadow of a figure disappearing into the stairwell. On the windowsill lay a silver cigarette case. Tuppence did not touch it. She stared at it the way one stares at a venomous snake. Albert whispered, "Is that?" "Yes," Tuppence said. "The very one Miss Grey warned us about." Tommy scanned the stairwell through the glass. "He's fast." "He meant to be seen," Tuppence said. "He wanted us to know we're marked." Albert looked nervously toward the door. "Should I go after him?" "No," Tuppence's voice was razor steady. "If he wanted confrontation, he'd have knocked." Tommy gently lifted the case with a handkerchief. No monogram, no brand, clean, sterile. As though it's meant to give nothing away. "He left it," Tuppence murmured, "as a message." "Or a claim," Tommy said, marking territory. "Or a warning." Albert swallowed hard. "What now?" Tuppence stood very still, the shadows around her shifting like a familiar cloak. "Now," she said, "we find the second document." "And Stephen," Tommy added. "And the man with this case," she said, her gaze fixed on the metallic shine. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly on the stairs. Someone leaving, someone watching, someone patient. The night pressed in, thick with unspoken danger. Tuppence stepped closer to the table, placing the cipher beneath the lamp. "We have a child courier, a stolen message, a broken chair leg, a woman terrified enough to flee France, and a man who follows shadows." Tommy nodded. "The past has returned." "And it wants to finish what it failed 20 years ago," she said. She looked at the photograph once more, Stephen tied to the chair, eyes wide, trusting her even from afar. "No matter who warns us," she whispered, "we do not stand down." Albert nodded firmly. "We'll get him back, Mrs. B." The silver case on the sill gleamed coldly, a silent promise of the dangers ahead. Tuppence squared her shoulders. "Let's begin." The quiet inside Miss Felicity Grey's house felt different the second time, not merely still, expectant, as though the air itself remembered the moment she collapsed and now waited for the next revelation, tense and listening. Tuppence Beresford stepped across the threshold first, absorbing the tremor of familiarity that threaded through her senses. Objects out of place always spoke to her, and today they were shouting. "Back to the beginning," Tuppence said softly, "before the chair, before the collapse, before everything we interpreted too quickly." Tommy closed the door behind them. "I'd say we have a fair idea what we're looking for." "Not a fair idea," Tuppence corrected. "A fractured one, and fractured ideas lead to fractured deductions." He grinned faintly. Then let's unfracture them. They climbed the narrow staircase to the bedroom where the broken rocking chair still sat askew, as though sulking after having surrendered its secret. The cushion remained dented, and dust crowned every surface except those that had recently been disturbed. Tuppence paused in the threshold. "There," she said immediately. "Something's missing." Tommy followed her line of vision. "The book?" "Yes." Tuppence moved toward the shelf, pressing her fingertip into the dust. "A gap, 1 volume wide, recently removed, and the dust isn't settled again yet." He knelt. "And the mantelpiece, look at that." She joined him. A rectangular patch of bare wood broke the otherwise uniform coating of dust. Tuppence narrowed her eyes. Something stood here. Something she took, or someone took. Tommy rose and paced the room. Why would she take only part of what she needed? Why hide some things in a chair leg but leave others accessible? Unless, Tuppence said slowly, she was packing in haste and prioritizing what she could carry. Which begs the question, where is the second document the cipher mentioned? Tuppence crossed to the suitcase lying open beside the bed, still half-packed, clothes spilling like a confession. She lifted garments carefully, a blouse, stockings, a small canvas pouch. Tommy, meanwhile, tugged at the lining. "Hold on," he muttered. "There's stitching here, newer than the rest." Tuppence joined him. Together they pried back the lining, and a faint clicking sound rewarded them. "A false bottom," Tommy said with a small, proud smile. "Classic." Inside lay a single torn envelope. Its flap had been ripped open in haste. Dust clung to it, but the faint typewritten label was still legible. F.G. Tuppence removed the slip of paper within. One sentence, typed, cold, mechanical. "The child completes the bargain." She felt the breath leave her. Tommy took the slip next, reading it under his breath. Good Lord. "Stephen," Tuppence whispered. "He wasn't just a messenger. He was the bargain." "Between whom?" Tommy asked. "Miss Grey and this CG entity?" "Or between Miss Grey and her pursuers," Tuppence said. "Or between someone else entirely." She folded the paper and slipped it into her coat. "This isn't a ransom, it's a transaction." Footsteps approached. The floorboard at the top of the stairs creaked. Tommy turned. Mrs. Cresswell, their nervous neighbour, appeared in the doorway holding a tray with 2 cups of tea and a tremulous smile. "I thought you might like something warm while you search," she said. "Poor Miss Grey. I can't bear to think of her suffering." Tommy accepted the tray politely. Tuppence, however, observed the way the woman's eyes darted, down the hall toward the stairwell at the suitcase, then away again. "Thank you," Tuppence said. "We found a few things we'd like to ask about." Mrs. Cresswell's fingers tightened around the teacup handle. "Oh?" "You mentioned Miss Grey behaving strangely," Tuppence said. "Not just the men visiting, but her comings and goings, hiding things." I don't know that I should." Tuppence softened her tone. "People's lives are at stake. A child's life." Mrs. Cresswell's shoulders sagged. "You're right. You must think me awful." "On the contrary," Tommy said kindly. "You're frightened, and rightly so." Mrs. Cresswell swallowed. "I saw her carry a tin, a tobacco tin. Odd thing, she never smoked. This was 2 days before she fainted. She slipped it into her coat pocket and kept checking it like it might burn her fingers." "Did you see what happened to it?" Tuppence asked. "No." Mrs. Cresswell looked toward the window. "But she went out to the back garden more than once. I heard her footsteps on the gravel." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance. "The shed," Tuppence murmured. Mrs. Cresswell wrung her hands. "I was too afraid to follow. I knew men were watching her, men I didn't recognize. I thought it best if I stayed out of it." "No harm in admitting fear," Tommy said gently. "But now we must use your insight." Tuppence set the tray aside. Her mind was already moving, not forward, but outward, expanding into the possibility that the garden held more than weeds. "Mrs. Cresswell," Tuppence said, "please stay inside with Tommy. I'll check the shed." But Tommy straightened at once. "You'll do no such thing alone. We go together." Tuppence allowed herself a faint smile. Naturally. They left Mrs. Cresswell in the hallway and descended the steps toward the back door. The garden beyond stretched long and slightly unkempt, the winter shrubs brittle, the flower beds dormant. The shed leaned against the back wall, its roof sagging under age, its hinges rusted but intact. Tommy pushed open the door with a grunt. Inside smelled of soil, old paint, and something faintly metallic. Gardening tools lined the walls in gentle disarray. Bags of compost lay half open. A broken wheelbarrow sat in the corner. Tuppence scanned everything twice before she saw it. A small tobacco tin, wedged behind a wooden crate. "There," she whispered. Tommy retrieved it and placed it in her hands. Tuppence opened the tin. Inside lay a folded document, flimsy, smudged but legible. A list, names, codes, locations, safe contacts from wartime France. Her breath caught. Look at the annotations. Some names had a small cross beside them, presumably deceased. Others had question marks, and one had a thick black circle around it. CG Tommy read over her shoulder. CG again. Whoever this is, they're at the center of everything. But at the bottom of the page, a final handwritten line. Unlike the cipher, the handwriting was hurried, slanted, desperate. If they find the boy first, all is lost. Tuppence closed the tin slowly. Then we must reach him before they do. Tommy nodded. This proves the boy wasn't merely a courier. He's the key. Tuppence stared at the list. Safe contacts, or unsafe ones. If CG is circled, they're either a protector, Tommy said, or the most dangerous person alive. They left the shed and returned through the garden, but Tuppence stopped abruptly halfway across. Tommy followed her gaze. Across the street, half hidden behind a street lamp, stood a figure, tall, still, watching. "Do you see him?" Tuppence whispered. "Yes," Tommy replied. "He's been standing there since we entered the garden." Tuppence's pulse raced, not out of fear but the cold clarity of imminent threat. "Stay here," Tommy murmured. He slipped out the back gate with a fluid quickness that belied his polished exterior. Tuppence waited, listening to the soft crunch of his steps on gravel as he moved around the side of the house. The figure across the street shifted, a head tilt, subtle, taunting. Tommy crossed the pavement in 3 bold strides, but as he reached the curb, the figure darted behind a delivery van. Tommy followed, but when he reached the other side, the man was gone, vanished. Tuppence joined him moments later. "Lost him?" she asked. "Completely," Tommy said. "He knew the timing. He knew the van's route. He used it deliberately." Tuppence's breath formed a soft exhale. "Someone is watching every step we take." "Then they know we've found the second document," Tommy said grimly. Tuppence lifted the tin in her hand. "Good. Let them know." "You're inviting danger," Tommy warned. "I'm acknowledging it," Tuppence corrected, "and positioning ourselves accordingly." They returned inside, where Mrs. Cresswell waited with wide, anxious eyes. "Did you find it?" she asked. "We did," Tuppence said. Mrs. Cresswell folded her hands. "Will you be able to help her? Help Miss Gray?" "Yes," Tuppence said, though her eyes drifted to the window. "But we must help Stephen first." Mrs. Cresswell shivered. "I hope you can. He's just a child." Tuppence gave a thin smile. Some of the most important messages in the world have been carried by children. Tommy placed a reassuring arm around her shoulders. "Come along. We've all had a long day." But as they left the house, the weight of the tin, the list of names, and the warning etched in frantic handwriting pressed heavy upon them. The net was tightening. A boy was in danger, and the second document had revealed something far worse. CG was not merely involved. CG was waiting. The silver cigarette case lay on the table like a sliver of frost, cold, polished, ominous. Albert stared at it as though it might leap up and bite. "So that's his calling card," he whispered. "Some nerve leaving it right on your windowsill." "That's precisely why he left it," Tuppence replied. "Men like him enjoy signalling their presence. It's a message. I see you. I'm close. I can reach you when I choose." Tommy examined the hinge. No monogram, no engraving. Very peculiar choice for a show-off. "Unless the case itself is the signature," Tuppence murmured. "Something known within certain circles." Albert perked up. "Actually, speaking of circles, I think I've found your man." Tuppence and Tommy both turned sharply. Albert swallowed and straightened his jacket, aware he'd just claimed something dangerous. "I went through some old police files. Ones that cross-reference ex-military and intelligence personnel who've been, let's say, asked to leave quietly. So, you found a match? Tommy pressed. Albert nodded. Randolph Keel. The name fell like a shadow across the room. Tuppence felt the old instincts stir, the instincts that told her when a name mattered, when history bound itself to the present with invisible thread. Keel, she repeated. I haven't heard that name in years. You know him? Albert asked. Tommy answered for her. Not personally, but during the war, Keel's reputation reached every department, sharp as a knife. Too sharp, some said. An officer who cut corners the way other men cut sandwiches. Discharged for trading information, Albert added. Not proven, mind you, but strongly suspected. Tuppence's gaze hardened. And now he works as a security consultant? Albert nodded. That's what the papers say, but unofficially. He's hired by people who don't want official help. Which means, Tommy said, people who don't want to be seen. Tuppence tapped the silver case. And this is his signature, which means he is the one following us, and possibly the one who sent the photo of Stephen. Albert shifted uneasily. Then what do we do? Tuppence didn't hesitate. We invite him to a meeting. Albert stared. You want to see him? I want to learn what he knows, Tuppence said, and men like Keel talk more when they believe they're in control. Tommy crossed his arms. How exactly do you propose arranging that? Through an old friend, Tuppence said. Someone Keel trusts enough to answer. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Is this one of those friends who still owes you for saving their job during the Paris incident? Not exactly, she said lightly. More someone who owes me for not revealing their preference for cash deals during the Tunis operation. Tommy burst out laughing. Ah, that friend. Albert blinked. Mrs. Beresford, just how many people owe you things? More than know they do, she replied serenely. By late afternoon, arrangements were made. The discreet club off Piccadilly had no sign on the door, no name on the ledger, and no tolerance for members who lacked influence. Plush carpets, dark panelled walls, and quiet murmurs created an atmosphere where secrets strolled freely disguised as small talk. Tuppence, impeccably dressed in a navy coat with understated elegance, entered with the confidence of a woman accustomed to such rooms. Tommy accompanied her, wearing the bland expression of a man who could pass as a banker, a solicitor, or a spy, depending on the company. A steward nodded discreetly. Your guest has arrived, madam. Tuppence thanked him, and they were led to a private corner where a man sat with his back to them, silver case glinting beside his drink. Randolph Keel. He turned as they approached, older than she'd imagined, hair greying at the temples, posture relaxed in a way that suggested danger rather than ease. His eyes were calm, assessing, and entirely without warmth. Mrs. Beresford, Keel said smoothly. A pleasure. Tuppence smiled with equal precision. Mr. Keel, thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice. He gestured toward the seats. Tommy sat beside Tuppence but angled his body slightly, ready, watchful. Keel poured 2 glasses from a crystal carafe. Your message suggested urgency. It was simply honest, Tuppence replied. I require your services. Keel's eyebrows lifted fractionally. Most women who require my services do not come accompanied by their husbands. Most women who seek your services, Tuppence said pleasantly, probably aren't being followed by former intelligence officers. Keel paused with the carafe in hand, too briefly for a man unaccustomed to catching his balance, but noticeable enough. Tommy hid a smirk. So, Keel said after a moment, pouring himself a drink, what is it you believe I can help you with? Tuppence leaned forward slightly. A child. Keel's expression remained neutral. Go on. A boy, about 7, vanished. We need him found. Keel swirled his drink thoughtfully. Children go missing every day. Not this one, Tuppence said. This one was sent to me, by someone running from danger. And why exactly? Keel asked coolly. Would someone send a child to you? Tuppence smiled faintly. Oh, I have my charms. Keel's gaze sharpened. You and your husband have been involved in certain activities. Rumours persist. We dabble, Tommy said lightly, mostly in situations where crimes need solving and the police are otherwise occupied. Keel's fingers tapped the silver case. "So the Beresfords are back in the game." "We never left," Tuppence replied. Keel studied them for a long moment. Then, "This child," he said quietly. "He was removed for safety." Tommy stilled. "Removed? By whom?" Keel sipped his drink. "By people who know far more than you do about the stakes involved." "And those stakes?" Tuppence pressed. Keel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Old business, long shadows, matters that should have died in 1945. Tuppence's pulse tightened. "Wartime remnants." He tapped the case again. "Not all operations end when the papers say they do." "And Miss Felicity Grey?" Tuppence asked softly. "Was she part of these remnants?" Keel gave nothing away. "Some people cling to their past because they cannot bear their present." "And what of CG?" Tommy asked. A name that keeps surfacing. For the first time, Keel's composure faltered. A flicker, a breath too sharp. Tuppence caught it instantly. Keel recovered. "Some initials are best buried." "Yet someone is resurrecting them," Tuppence said. Keel leaned forward, voice lowering. "Mrs. Beresford, your curiosity is admirable, truly, but some lines of inquiry are unwise." "Is that a warning?" Tommy asked. Keel held Tommy's gaze without blinking. "It is a suggestion." Tuppence folded her hands. "Mr. Keel, you've been looking for this child. You could have killed us if that was your aim. Instead, you left us clues. You could have remained invisible, yet you revealed yourself." Keel's smile sharpened. "Perhaps I wanted to see if the Beresfords still had their wits." "Or perhaps," Tuppence said softly, "you're testing us." Keel did not deny it. She pressed further. "Why am I involved? Why was the child sent to me?" But Keel shook his head. "You've reached the limit of my hospitality." He stood. As he did, Tommy slipped away unnoticed, a movement so practiced it was almost invisible. Tuppence continued speaking, covering Tommy's departure flawlessly. "Mr. Keel," she said, "one last question." He paused. "Does the child have the second document?" His jaw tightened, the smallest, sharpest of reactions. "That is not information you should possess," he said softly. "But I do," she replied, "and more." Keel stepped closer. "Mrs. Beresford, listen carefully. There is more at play here than a frightened woman and a missing boy. Miss Grey was part of something larger, something unfinished, and people, dangerous people, want to finish it." "And you?" Tuppence asked. "What do you want?" Keel's expression was unreadable. "Balance." He turned and walked away. Tuppence counted to 5 under her breath, then rose and followed. Tommy moved through the club like a man who belonged in every corner. His years of practice made him a natural trespasser, respectful, quiet, invisible when needed. The steward told them Keel rented a private office on the top floor. Tommy found it locked. He picked it in under 10 seconds. Inside, the office was Spartan, functional, with no decorations save for a single desk lamp and a filing cabinet. On the desk lay a ledger, thick, leather-bound and recently used. Tommy flipped it open. Names, payments, coded entries, but 2 lines punched through the secrecy. FG, final delivery pending. CG, awaiting confirmation. Tommy felt a cold line run down his spine. FG, Felicity Grey. CG, the same initials circled in the document from the shed, the same initials haunting every clue. Tommy tore the ledger page free, folded it and pocketed it. Just as he did, footsteps approached. He slipped behind the door. Keel's voice carried through the hall. "Search the room." Tommy held his breath. Keel entered, scanned the office, and stopped. "Something's missing," he said. Tommy eased toward the window. Keel opened the drawer sharply. His tone hardened. "The ledger. Someone has been here." Tommy slipped out onto the balcony, moving quickly but silently, descending the back fire ladder with a speed that would have impressed even Keel at his prime. Tuppence waited at the foot of the stairs, intuition prickling. Tommy appeared seconds later, slightly breathless but triumphant. "Got it," he murmured, handing her the folded ledger page. Footsteps thundered above. "Go!" Tuppence hissed. They exited the club through the side door just as Keel appeared at the top of the staircase, silver case in hand, gaze burning with recognition. Tuppence and Tommy didn't look back. They walked briskly along Piccadilly, blending into the swirl of late-night diners and theatre-goers. "Keel knows we're on to him now," Tommy said. "He knew the moment he saw us," Tuppence replied, "but now he knows we have proof." Tommy tapped the ledger page. "FG, final delivery pending. That must refer to the second document." Tuppence nodded. "And CG, awaiting confirmation. Whoever CG is, they're the one Keel answers to, or fears." Tommy exhaled. "This narrows it." Tuppence placed a hand on his arm, her voice low but fierce. "It also means Stephen is running out of time." Tommy nodded. The river, the ledger, the initials, the shadowy watchers, all signs pointed in one direction. "Next stop," Tuppence said, "the warehouse by the water." The final chase had begun. The riverfront at night had a character all its own. Not sinister, not welcoming, but something older, tired and busy remembering things it wished it had forgotten. The water slapped the pilings with a slow, patient rhythm, as though marking time for secrets sunk long ago. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford walked side by side along the narrow embankment path, guided only by the faint glow of distant lamps and the persistent whisper of the tide. "Warehouse numbers 7 through 11, Tommy murmured, checking the ledger page they had taken from Keel's office. "Keel's payments correspond to deliveries marked by these locations." "And each warehouse belonged to different import companies," Tuppence said, peering up at the skeletal silhouettes of the looming structures, "but all managed through the same shadow accounts." Tommy nodded. "Which makes them the perfect place for clandestine operations." "Or to hide a frightened child," Tuppence added quietly. A gull cried sharply overhead as if echoing her fear. They reached the first warehouse, a hulking block of brick and corrugated iron that looked as though it hadn't been touched since the late Victorian era. Tommy forced the sliding door an inch open and peered in. Dust, crates, silence. "Not this one," he said. The second warehouse offered nothing more interesting than a colony of spiders. "Stephen wouldn't have lasted an hour in there," Tommy said, brushing cobwebs from his sleeve. The third warehouse, however, changed everything. Tuppence halted mid-step. "Look." Tommy followed her gaze. The large padlock on the door hung unfastened, resting askew as though someone had been interrupted while securing it. A faint trail of scuffed dust led inside, as if feet had dragged lightly over the threshold. But what struck Tuppence most was the lantern just inside the doorway, still warm, still glowing faintly with dying light. "No one leaves a lantern warm unless they plan to return," she whispered. Tommy pushed the door further open. The warehouse yawned before them, dark, cavernous, with rafters stretching overhead like the ribs of a sleeping beast. The smell of rope, oil and salt water filled their lungs. A rope ladder dangled from a loft area above. "Footprints," Tuppence murmured, pointing at the dust. "Small ones. Fresh." Tommy's jaw set. "Stephen." They stepped inside, senses sharpened, breath shallow with anticipation. To their right lay a stack of old crates, some cracked, some rotting. Tommy circled them, scanning for movement. Tuppence veered left, fingers brushing lightly over surfaces, searching for signs. It didn't take long. Against the wall, near a coil of frayed rope, lay a small scrap of paper. She picked it up with trembling fingers. A drawing, crude, uneven, done in thick wax crayon. A stick figure, and another taller figure with a hat. A blue square scribbled in one corner. "His cap," Tuppence whispered. "He drew his cap." Tommy approached softly. "He was here." "And recently," Tuppence said, "the crayon hasn't smudged from air moisture yet." A gentle flurry of dust rose from across the room as Tommy brushed aside debris. "Tuppence," he called, his voice low and tense. She hurried to him. On the floor, half-tucked beneath a crate, lay Stephen's blue cap. Her breath caught. She touched the fabric reverently. "He must have dropped it while struggling," she whispered. "He was here. He must have been terrified." Tommy placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find him." Before she could reply, a sound cut through the warehouse, the distinct metallic slam of a door closing. Not theirs. Tommy's eyes widened. "Hide," he mouthed. They slipped behind a stack of crates just as footsteps echoed inside the warehouse. Heavy, certain, unfriendly. Two voices drifted through the shadows, low and brusque. "Keel wants them moved before dawn," the first man said. "Both of them?" "Yes. The boy and the woman. CG wants them both alive until they reach Harrogate Lodge, so no bruises this time. Where's the van? Round back. We'll bring them out through the side entrance. Keel doesn't want attention. And the Beresfords? Keel will handle them. Something in the man's tone suggested that whatever Keel intended, it did not involve kindness. The men paused. One of them kicked a crate. Did you hear something? Tommy's foot twitched involuntarily, nudging a splinter of wood. The crate wobbled. The men spun. There! Someone's here! Tommy seized Tuppence's hand. They darted between crates, feet soundless against the dusty floor. The men charged after them, cursing, flashlights slicing through the gloom. This way, Tommy hissed, pulling her toward the ladder. The rope ladder swung wildly as they climbed, their fingers slipping over worn hemp strands. The loft above was narrow, little more than a wooden catwalk, but it provided height. And height, as Tommy always said, was tactical advantage. Below, the men scanned the floor. They went up. Tommy pulled Tuppence behind a stack of burlap sacks. 2 seconds later, a bullet thunked into the beam beside her head. Oh, marvellous, she muttered. They're enthusiastic. Move along the catwalk, Tommy whispered. We can drop behind them. They crept along the narrow beam. Wood creaked softly beneath them. One of the men fired again, the bullet ricocheting off metal and sparking into shadows. They're nearly above us, shouted one. Cut them off. Tommy spotted a narrow ladder descending to the far side. He gestured silently. They began the descent. Slow, careful. Halfway down, a shout erupted beneath them. There! The ladder! Tommy moved faster, dropping the last few steps and helping Tuppence down. They sprinted toward the side entrance, weaving between machinery and crates. Behind them, footsteps thundered. They burst through a small service door. The night air slapped their faces with cold relief. This way, Tommy urged. They raced along the narrow walkway between the warehouses. The river glimmered through iron railings, black and restless. The men pursued them relentlessly. Don't let them get away. Tommy yanked Tuppence into a tight corner between 2 loading docks. They flattened themselves against the brick wall, breath held. The men rushed past, boots striking hard against the concrete. After several seconds, the footsteps faded toward the far end of the quay. Tommy exhaled. That, Tuppence whispered, was entirely too close. Agreed. They waited a moment longer, ensuring the coast was clear before stepping cautiously back toward the warehouse's rear side. Tommy, Tuppence murmured. Before they saw us, they mentioned a place, Harrogate Lodge. I heard, he said grimly, and they said CG wants the boy and Miss Grey alive. Tuppence's mind raced. CG, she repeated. We assumed initials, but now I'm not so certain. Tommy frowned. Then what is it? A designation, she said softly. A code. Something used in the old cipher network. Tommy's eyes lit with recognition, like control group or central gatekeeper. Or contact guardian, Tuppence murmured. There were more layered codes in use near the end of the war than we realized. Well, Tommy said, whoever CG is, they're pulling every string. And we must find Harrogate Lodge, she said. Now. They circled back toward the warehouse to search for additional clues, but what they found instead made the night grow colder. Near the back door lay a length of rope, frayed, cut recently, and beside it, a small biscuit wrapper, Stephen's favourite brand. He was here, Tuppence whispered again, her voice trembling under the weight of restrained fear. He was here hours ago. Tommy crouched beside the rope. This was used to bind him. They cut it to move him. Tuppence held the wrapper tightly. We're close, Tommy, very close. And Keel knows it, Tommy said grimly. They left the waterfront and made for a public telephone booth at the edge of the street. Albert answered instantly. Mrs. B, what's wrong? You sound... Albert, listen carefully, Tuppence said, her tone steady but urgent. We need everything you can find on a location called Harrogate Lodge. Harrogate Lodge? Sounds country or rural estate. Exactly, she said. Search property records. Former military usage. Abandoned estates. Anything with that name. Tommy added, and run it against wartime safehouse logs. Albert scribbled furiously. I'm on it. Ring you back in 10. Tuppence hung up and leaned against the booth, drawing a long breath. We're racing ghosts, she whispered. No, Tommy replied gently, taking her hand. We're racing men who think shadows will protect them. They won't, she said. Not from us. They walked back toward the embankment to ensure they hadn't missed anything. The warehouses loomed like silent sentinels. The river rolled darkly beneath the wharf. Tommy. Tuppence had stopped. He turned. She pointed at the water. A boat, a small motor launch drifting with the current, tied loosely to a bollard. The engine cooled, ticking faintly. Someone arrived by water, she said. Tommy checked the rope. Recently. Very recently. Tuppence scanned the deck. A coil of wet rope, an empty crate, and on the bench, a scarf, Miss Gray's scarf. Tuppence pressed it to her chest. They're moving her, she whispered, and they're doing it quickly. Tommy stepped closer to her, voice low and fierce. We will find them. And Keel, she said, we must confront him. Tommy's jaw tightened. We will. But first, Stephen. Tuppence closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed resolve. Their path now pointed to one destination, Harrogate Lodge. But before they could leave the riverside, a soft shuffle of footsteps made them turn. A shadowy figure stood at the far end of the quay, motionless, watching. Tommy tensed. Not again. But when he stepped forward, the figure fled, disappearing behind a stack of crates. Tuppence's voice was calm, almost icy. Let him run. His fear tells me one thing. What? We're getting close. They returned to the street and waited tensely until the telephone rang. Albert's voice burst through. Found it! Harrogate Lodge is an old estate outside London. Decommissioned safe house used during the war for coded transfers and temporary holds. It's remote, secluded, perfect for hiding people. Tuppence's eyes shone with grim certainty. Then that is where they've taken Stephen, she said. And Miss Gray, Tommy added. And possibly, Tuppence whispered, where C.G. waits. They exchanged a look, one of courage, determination, and unspoken fear. Then Tuppence lifted her chin. To Harrogate Lodge, she said. The night around them seemed to lean in, listening, and the chase, the true chase, had begun. The road to Harrogate Lodge wound through a stretch of countryside that grew lonelier with every passing mile. Tall yew trees lined the lane like silent, brooding sentinels, their branches forming an archway that filtered dusk into a cool, bluish gloom. Tommy slowed the car as they approached the estate's wrought-iron gates, tall, intricate, and unmistakably reinforced. Well, he murmured, this doesn't look like a place where friendly tea is served. Tuppence studied the shadows behind the gate. Two men stood there, broad-shouldered, expressionless, and too rigid to be ordinary staff. Their stance carried a familiarity she recognized instantly, the posture of men trained not merely to serve, but to intercept. They're ex-military, she said quietly, not decorative. Tommy stopped the car. One guard approached. State your business, he said flatly. Tuppence rolled down the window with a calm smile. We have an appointment. Documents for C.G. of immediate importance. The guard's eyes flickered, just slightly, but enough. Wait. He disappeared behind the gates. The moments stretched. Tuppence felt each one thrum with tension. Finally, the gates creaked open, wordless invitation in the sound. Tommy drove through. Harrogate Lodge emerged at the end of a gravel drive, a stone house of sharp lines and old wealth, not large but authoritative. Its tall windows glowed faintly from within, revealing heavy furniture and the kind of drapery that muffled both sound and conscience. This place feels curated, Tommy said as he parked, like everything is arranged to hide whatever isn't meant to be noticed. Tuppence stepped out, her gaze attuned to every detail. That's because it is. A servant opened the front door before they even reached it. Mrs. Beresford, Mr. Beresford, you are expected. They exchanged a glance. Inside, the lodge felt like stepping into a sealed chamber of history. The air held a deliberate stillness, as though nothing was allowed to move without permission. Portraits of severe-looking individuals lined the walls, some military, some civilian, all radiating austere authority. Tuppence felt a prickling familiarity. This atmosphere, Bah, she murmured. Controlled, watchful, strategic. Tommy whispered, I can't decide if I should be impressed or annoyed. They were led into a drawing room where velvet curtains blocked the remaining daylight. A fire burned low in the grate, painting the room in amber and shadow. "Madame Crown will join you shortly," the servant said before withdrawing. The name made Tuppence's breath still. Tommy gave her a questioning look. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed. A woman entered, elegant, severe, silver hair coiled into a perfect knot. Her posture spoke not merely of authority but of command, the confidence of someone who had once given orders that decided fates. "I am Madame Crown," she said. The name hit Tuppence like a blow of memory. C.G. Crown Group. Not a person. A committee. A covert wartime council whispered about in backrooms and intelligence briefings, supposedly disbanded, supposedly never formalized. But the rumors had always included one architect, one strategist known only as Madame Crown, a mastermind of intellect, resolve, and ruthlessness. Tuppence kept her expression smooth. She inclined her head. "Madame Crown, thank you for seeing us." Crown's eyes shone with cool amusement. "You came under the pretext of delivering documents. Let us not insult one another with pretexts." Tommy stepped forward, adopting his most diplomatic smile. "Then perhaps you will do us the courtesy of explaining why a child has been taken, and why Miss Grey lies in danger." Crown's gaze sharpened. "Miss Grey has placed herself in danger by attempting to expose something she never fully understood." "And Stephen?" Tuppence asked. Crown's voice softened, though the steel beneath it remained. "The boy is part of a chain that should have remained broken. Information he carries has implications far beyond your comprehension." "You mean incriminating evidence," Tuppence said. Crown's lips curved slightly. "Let us call them inconvenient truths." She moved with gliding precision to a table where a decanter of brandy rested. She poured herself a measure, ignoring the Beresfords. "You are wondering what Crown Group is," she said, "or rather, what it was." Tuppence allowed a hint of curiosity. "We've heard whispers." "Then you know it was a council born of necessity," Crown replied. "During the war, we handled certain operations," Tommy interjected. "And after the war?" "Some operations do not end simply because a date on a calendar changes," she said crisply. "Loose ends remained." "Loose ends such as Felicity Grey?" Tuppence asked. Crown's expression cooled even further. Miss Grey had her uses, but she also believed certain information should be revealed. "And you disagree," Tommy said. Crown took a sip of brandy. "I believe in stability, order, continuation. Miss Grey believes in confession." "And Stephen?" Tuppence pressed. "What could a child possibly carry?" Crown turned sharply. "You know very well children were used as couriers. Their innocence made them invisible. Stephen carries something, not physically, but in memory. Something taught to him by someone who should never have passed it on." Tuppence felt a chill. "A code sequence?" "A safe route pattern," Crown replied, "one that reveals the identities of several former operatives who have since diversified their interests." "Illicit trades," Tuppence murmured. "Global, profitable and fragile," Crown said with detached pride. "One broken link threatens all." "And you want the boy to disappear," Tommy said flatly. Crown set down her glass. "I want this matter resolved, and yes, permanently." Tuppence's mind moved rapidly. Crown was dangerous, yes, but she was also predictable. She believed in logic, structure, control, which meant she believed in blind spots. "Where are they?" Tuppence asked. Crown's smile returned, faint and cold. "Safe." But at that moment Tommy feigned a mild cough, the signal they had rehearsed. He drifted toward the far doorway under the guise of admiring a painting. The servant outside barely glanced at him. Tuppence leaned in. "Madame Crown, you are fighting a war on the wrong front." Crown raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Keel," Tuppence said. "You trust him." Crown stiffened almost imperceptibly. "He is your right hand," Tuppence continued, "but Keel trades information to the highest bidder. We know this. We have his ledger." The effect was immediate. Crown's brandy glass stilled midway to her lips. Her pupils tightened. "What did you say?" she asked, voice dangerously soft. "I said," Tuppence repeated deliberately, "we have Keel's ledger." For the first time, Crown's controlled facade cracked. Meanwhile, Tommy slipped quietly into the corridor, locating the side staircase. A guard patrolled the lower landing. Tommy waited for the right moment, then dropped a small brass coin deliberately. It clattered loudly. The guard turned. Tommy vanished around the bend. Upstairs, 2 rooms stood opposite one another. Doors locked. Tommy tried the first. Locked. He pressed his ear against it. A faint whimper. "Stephen," Tommy breathed. He picked the lock in seconds. Inside, Stephen sat tied to a chair, not harshly but securely, with wide, terrified eyes that recognized Tommy instantly. "You came," he whispered. "Of course we did," Tommy said gently, untying him. "Quiet now. We're getting you out." But Stephen grabbed Tommy's sleeve urgently. "The lady," he whispered. "They took her too." "The other room?" Tommy asked. Stephen nodded vigorously. Tommy crossed quickly, unlocking the second door. Miss Felicity Gray lay on the bed, pale, weak but alive. Her eyes fluttered open. "Tuppence," she rasped. "They'll come back. You must hurry." "We will," Tommy said. "Lean on me." Meanwhile, downstairs, Tuppence guided Crown exactly where she wanted her. "You believed Keel loyal," Tuppence said, "but he's turning your operations against you." Crown rose sharply. "You lie." "Do I?" Tuppence lifted an eyebrow. "He sent a message to us, a photograph of the boy. Intimidation. But intimidation is a blunt instrument, and Keel prides himself on precision." Crown's nostrils flared. "And what would you know of precision?" she asked. "Enough to know when it's missing," Tuppence said coolly. The door behind Tuppence opened. Tommy stood there, Stephen beside him, Miss Gray leaning heavily on his arm. Crown's face blanched. "You fools," she whispered. "You have no idea what you've interfered with." "No," Tuppence said, stepping protectively in front of Stephen. "I think we understand perfectly." Guards rushed toward them from the hall, 2 from the staircase, 1 from the kitchen corridor. Tommy grabbed a ceramic vase from a side table and hurled it into the path of the first guard. It shattered spectacularly, surprising him long enough for Tommy to duck and sweep his legs. Tuppence seized the intercom panel mounted on the wall, a sleek wartime model with coded frequency toggles. She flipped the switch marked Level B. A shrill alarm blasted through the lodge. Guards stumbled, covering their ears. "What have you done?" Crown shouted. "Activated your internal lockdown sequence," Tuppence said brightly. "Quite clever, really. It seals off all exterior exits, except the one in the servants' hall." Tommy ushered Stephen and Miss Gray toward the hallway. Crown lunged, but Tuppence blocked her path with a heavy-backed dining chair, 1 sharp shove sending Crown reeling. "Time to leave," Tuppence said crisply. They hurried down the corridor, past confused guards struggling to disable the alarm. Through the servants' hall, through the narrow back door, out into the cold air of the estate yard. Crown appeared in the doorway behind them, furious, unmasked, dangerous. "You can't stop this," she cried. "The network is larger than you know." Tommy didn't look back. "We'll take our chances." They reached the car. Tommy helped Miss Gray into the back seat. Tuppence slid in beside her. Stephen pressed close to her side. "Drive," Tuppence urged. Tommy didn't need telling twice. Gravel sprayed behind them as the car shot down the lane. In the rearview mirror, a flash of silver hair vanished into the dark trees. "She's escaping," Tuppence murmured. "Let her," Tommy said. "She's lost her leverage." But Tuppence knew better. "No," she whispered. "She's regrouping." Miss Gray, barely conscious, gripped Tuppence's hand. "The boy. He's important," she whispered. "They taught him something. I didn't mean for him to be used." "Hush," Tuppence said softly. "You're safe now. He's safe now. You can tell us everything when you're ready." Miss Gray closed her eyes. Tuppence looked at Stephen, the boy who had walked into their flat asking for her by name, carrying secrets from a war that refused to stay buried. "We're nearly there," she said gently. Tommy drove on into the night. Behind them, Harrogate Lodge disappeared into the darkness. Ahead of them waited London, and the truth Miss Gray had yet to reveal. The streets of London never looked so welcome, or so fragile, as when Tommy and Tuppence brought Stephen and Miss Gray back to South Audley Mansions. The city's evening bustle hummed beneath their window like a reassurance that ordinary life existed somewhere beyond conspiracies and shadowy wartime ghosts. Miss Gray lay on the sofa, wrapped in a soft blanket, a cup of broth untouched on the side table. Her colour was returning, though her hands trembled as she tried to sit upright. "Easy," Tuppence said gently, adjusting the pillow behind her back. Stephen stood close beside her, one hand resting on her sleeve as if anchoring her in place. Miss Grey's eyes softened. "You saved us," she said faintly. "All of us." Tommy sat opposite her. "Now you save us, with the truth." Miss Grey nodded. "Yes, it's time." She took a slow breath, gathering her strength. "Stephen is not my child," she began, "but I have loved him as though he were. His mother was named Marianne Hale, a courier during the war. Brilliant, resourceful, fearless. She worked in regions where women were underestimated. She used that underestimation to deliver some of the most dangerous dispatches of that year." She looked at Stephen with aching tenderness. She carried coded documents so sensitive that even Crown Group feared them. At the name, Stephen flinched. "Marianne was entrusted with a final confession," Miss Grey continued, "a document exposing illicit trades conducted by certain operatives, wartime heroes turned profiteers. Madame Crown was among them. So was Keel." Tommy's eyebrows shot up. "So her confession implicated the entire network?" Miss Grey nodded weakly. "Before Marianne could deliver it, she was cornered in Calais. She knew she wouldn't survive. She had seconds to choose. She slipped the infant Stephen into my arms, he was barely 6 months old, and pressed the cipher into my hand. She told me, 'He is the key. Protect him until he can choose his future.' She died minutes later." Stephen's eyes filled with confusion and fear. "My mum, she's—" Miss Grey held his cheek. "Your mother died a hero, Stephen. She died protecting you, and something she believed the world must someday know." Tuppence placed a soft hand on Stephen's shoulder. "You were never a pawn. You were trusted." Stephen swallowed, blinking back tears. Miss Grey continued, voice steadier now. "The confession Marianne left behind wasn't a simple letter. It was encoded, locked behind a password Marianne taught only to Stephen in infancy." Tommy blinked. "You mean a word, a phrase?" "No," Miss Grey said. "A tune." Tuppence stilled. "A tune?" she repeated. "Yes," Miss Grey whispered. "A lullaby Marianne composed herself. The notes form the cipher key. Stephen hums it constantly. He grew up with it, never knowing its meaning." Tuppence turned to the boy. "Stephen, would you hum it for us?" Stephen hesitated, then nodded, shy but trusting. He began to hum, a simple melody, soft and wavering. A rise, a dip, a repeated phrase. Nothing elaborate, yet unmistakably purposeful. Miss Grey's eyes welled. There it is, Marianne's key." Tuppence grabbed her notebook, writing the sequence down rapidly. "These intervals, they match the pattern breaks in the cipher. That's why we couldn't finish decoding it last time." Tommy leaned over her shoulder. "If we convert the notes into letters—" Tuppence was already doing it. Miss Grey held her breath, and the hidden message emerged. A list, dates, locations, names, all tied to Madame Crown's illicit network. Stolen documents, forged identities sold to foreign buyers, wartime intelligence traded for post-war influence. Tommy exhaled. "This is enough to bring them all down. Crown, Keel, every collaborator." Miss Grey whispered, "This is why they wanted Stephen alive. Without the lullaby, their secrets remained locked." Tuppence folded the pages. "Then it's time the authorities handled the rest." The next morning, Tommy marched the decoded confession to a trusted contact in the Home Office, someone he'd worked with during a quieter case years before. The man's face blanched as he scanned the pages. "This will cause an earthquake," he muttered, "but a necessary one." Within hours, orders were issued. By afternoon, Keel was arrested in a small flat near Bloomsbury, caught attempting to burn a stack of old Crown Group ledgers. He fought hard, but not cleverly. Cornered men rarely do. Tommy returned home with the news. "That's one serpent beheaded," he said. "But the other, Madame Crown," Tuppence finished, "will not go quietly." Miss Grey, sitting upright now with a cup of tea, nodded weakly. "She will try to reclaim what control she can. She may even attempt something rash." Tuppence's gaze drifted to Stephen, who sat on the rug drawing quietly. "She'll come for him," Tuppence whispered. Tommy sat beside her. "Then we stay ready." But Crown didn't strike at home. She struck where the Beresfords least expected it, Paddington Station. They had taken Stephen and Miss Grey for a short walk, hoping a bit of fresh air and normalcy would help steady their nerves. Paddington, with its soaring ironwork and bustling platform crowds, offered anonymity in noise. Stephen tugged Tuppence's hand. "Can I look at the trains?" "Only if you stay in sight," she said with a gentle smile. Miss Grey rested on a bench. Tommy stood beside her, scanning the station with practiced caution. Tuppence knelt beside Stephen as he pointed eagerly at a gleaming engine. "Look, that one's huge." "It certainly is," she said warmly. Then she felt it, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. She turned. A woman stood 20 yards away, elegant, severe, silver hair coiled into a perfect knot. Madame Crown. Tuppence rose slowly. "Tommy," she murmured. He turned and froze. Crown began to move forward, her expression serene, almost polite, too polite. "Tuppence," Tommy said calmly, "get Stephen behind you." But Crown was already speaking. "Mrs. Beresford," she said, "you've caused me considerable inconvenience." Tuppence stepped between Crown and the boy. "You're under arrest, Madam Crown." Crown smiled faintly. "Oh, my dear, the law you place such faith in is far slower than you imagine." Her hand twitched, and Tuppence caught the glint of something metallic concealed within her sleeve. Not a gun. Worse, a syringe. "Tuppence!" Tommy shouted, but Tuppence was already moving. She seized Stephen's arm and spun him behind her, stepping into Crown's path with such speed that Crown almost collided with her. The syringe flashed, but Tuppence deflected Crown's arm, twisting her wrist hard enough to send the instrument clattering to the floor. Passengers gasped. Someone shouted for a constable. Crown hissed, "You think you've won?" "Yes," Tuppence said coolly. "I rather think we have." Tommy reached them, grabbing Crown's other arm. Miss Grey, pale but determined, had risen from the bench. Crown struggled, elegant, composed violence, but the station crowd was already turning hostile. Voices rose, people pointed, a constable hurried forward. Tuppence tightened her grip. "It's over." Crown finally stopped fighting. Her eyes burned with cold fury. "You don't understand the consequences." "Oh, I do," Tuppence replied, "and I've never been more comfortable with consequences." The constable secured Crown's wrists as she glared at the Beresfords with venom so cold it seemed almost ancient. "This is not the end," Crown whispered. Tuppence smiled thinly. "For you? It rather is." Hours later, back at South Audley Mansions, calm finally settled over the flat. Miss Grey slept peacefully in the spare room. Stephen sat at the table drawing another crayon picture, this one brighter, with Tuppence, Tommy and himself holding hands. Tommy brewed tea, setting 2 cups on the table. "You know," he said lightly, "we really must stop telling people we live a quiet life." Tuppence laughed, a warm, relieved sound. "We've never lived a quiet life, even when we pretend." Tommy slid into the chair beside her. "Do you regret it?" Tuppence looked at Stephen, safe, smiling, humming the tune his mother left him. "No," she said softly, "not at all." She brushed Stephen's hair from his eyes. "Besides, some mysteries arrive precisely when we need reminding of who we are." Tommy clinked his cup against hers. "To who we are, then." "And to what comes next," she added. The kettle purred on the stove. Laughter drifted softly through the flat. And for a moment, just a moment, peace settled around the Beresfords like a familiar shawl. But peace in their home, as Tommy often said, never lasted long, and neither of them would have had it any other way.